Love and trust, two things I thought for the longest time I'd never achieve in my lifetime. I was an innocent boy, untouched by the ugliness that life sometimes throws at you when the incident happened that set everything into play. There is a line from a Charles Dickens classic that best describes my childhood. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Forget my parents, if it weren't for my grandmother and my best friend in the world, Jeremy. I never would have even made it out of grade school, much less through college. It took 20 years before I could finally look in the mirror every morning and not think about what it took to get me this far. The nightmares are all but gone. And the anger? Well, that too is under control. Regrettably, however, there was a price to pay. We buried my grandmother just before my 24th birthday, a loss I still feel today. Jeremy and his wife, Cindy, continue to be there for me when I need a sounding board, which thankfully isn't often anymore. Regina, the love of my life, says she understands how I feel because she, like me, has seen adversity in her life but always had the backing of a loving and caring family, which I didn't have. So I smile, give her a kiss, and thank her for being in my life. It was 3 days before my 5th birthday when my mom walked out on my dad and me. Looking back, the first thing I remember about that day was it being loud, louder than it usually was around our house. I couldn't hear what they were arguing about, and at 5 I probably wouldn't have understood it anyway. However, when I heard glass breaking along with screaming, I walked from our living room, where I'd been trying to watch television, to the doorway leading into her kitchen. My mother was pulling everything out of the cupboards and throwing it on the floor, all the while screaming at my dad, who was standing less than 5 feet away on the other side of the counter, screaming right back at her. Frightened is how I felt at that moment. All I could think was grown-ups don't act like that. Or weren't supposed to, were they? I must have started crying because I heard my dad yell at Mom, "Look at what the hell you're doing. You're scaring the shit out of your own son." I remember him coming over, picking me up, giving me a kiss and a hug while carrying me out of the kitchen. "You really are a piece of work. You know that?" He yelled over his shoulder at my mom. She yelled something back that I would have had my mouth washed out with soap for saying, and continued throwing everything around the kitchen. He put me down, telling me to go watch television, but I wasn't going anywhere. They went at it again. Names were flung back and forth, and when Mom stopped, I figured it was over, until the next time, that is. "I don't need this shit," she yelled, grabbing for her coat and car keys. "I'm out of here, and I'm not coming back. Don't let the door hit you in the butt on your way out, you tramp," was my dad's quick reply, but all I heard was what my mom said. She was leaving us. Crying hysterically, I ran after her, out the kitchen door, and into the garage. "Mommy, Mommy," I yelled, following close behind her. "Damn it, go back into the house," was all she said to me, but I wasn't going to let her leave. She was practically running to reach her car parked in the driveway. When I caught up to her, tears were running down my cheeks as I reached for her. I said, "Go back into the house, you hear me?" I was reaching for her, grasping at anything I could get my hands on. Now with both my arms around her waist, I figured I'd stopped her from leaving. She pried my small arms off her. "Stephen Joseph," I said, "go back into the house now." I was reaching for her one more time, and that's when it happened. Whether she meant it or not, she still did it, and to this day it's burned into my brain. I felt the sting and heat from the slap immediately, and for me, time stopped. My mother had never slapped me before. Hell, she had never even spanked me. I was in shock. I just stood there looking into her tear-stained eyes. Something died inside of me that day. I was innocent, untouched before that moment, and now I would be marked for the rest of my life. "You witch. Get the hell away from him," my dad screamed. He grabbed me and carried me back into the house. But even that move didn't stop my little brain from trying to process how my mother could have done this to me. I thought she loved me. I wasn't crying anymore. I was numb. My dad sat me on the couch. He stared out the front window, watching my mom drive off. Those neighbors who were home at the time got quite a show that afternoon, and to this day they still talk about that little display on our driveway. The next 24 to 48 hours were a blur. My grandmother came over, and some type of plan was made about the who, what, where, when, and why of my meager existence. From that day forward, my grandma was there every morning when I woke up and would stay with me until Dad got home from work. And my loving mother? Well, that became my problem after my dad and his family washed their hands of her. It was almost a month before I saw my mother again. My grandma brought me over to her parents' house. I got to spend all of Saturday and most of Sunday with her. Loving and caring is what she was that weekend. Nothing was said about what she had done the day she left, and all I really cared about was that I was with her again. "As soon as I get settled, you'll come live with me," she kept promising over and over, And at 5, I had no reason not to believe her. But no matter how many times she said it, it never happened. Her weekly visits became bi-weekly, then once a month, and finally it seemed I only saw her on holidays and special occasions, especially as I grew older. I think things came to a head when I was dropped off at my grandparents' one Friday after school and she never showed up to see me all weekend. Her parents, my grandparents, always made sure I was kept busy, but they weren't the one I had come to see. I needed my mother, but did she still want me? Honey, your mom had to work this weekend, they told me. She has an important job, and you should be proud of her. I didn't care about her important job. I just wanted her. Guess I just wasn't important enough. After that weekend, if mom wanted to see me, my dad made her pick me up at our house. She said she loved me. Only when I saw her now, she always had some man with her. I think I was 13 when she came to pick me up one Friday night with another one of her boyfriends in tow. I took one look at her and shut the door. I never spent another weekend with her after that. She would call, email, and text me. That was about it. As I said, in her eyes, I wasn't important anymore. I'd been replaced by something, or should I say someone else in her life. I finally came to this realization. I no longer wanted to be another obligation for her. Kids can be mean, especially if you're not a member of their special group or clique. At first, it was just questions about why I didn't have a mother. I would tell them I did have a mother, she just didn't live with us anymore. Later came the taunting, name-calling, and finally the pushing and shoving. I don't know how many times I came home from school in tears. My grandmother was always there for me with a kiss and a hug. As I grew older, that did nothing for my cuts, bruises, and hurt feelings. After a particularly bad day at school, I came home with a black eye. A kid at school said that his father told him my mother was a tramp and my father had kicked her out because of it. We went round and round with is not, is so probably a dozen or more times before I finally ended up pushing him. He and 2 of his buddies then proceeded to kick the shit out of me. If it hadn't been for Jeremy, I don't know what would have happened. He came up from behind them and dragged them off me. With 2 against 3, we put up a pretty good fight. Still, we got the worst of it. Hard not to, since they were older and bigger than us. After that day, Jeremy and I became inseparable. When my dad saw me, he was livid. He looked at my face and is turned red with rage. "Who did this to you?" "A couple older boys," was my reply, looking down at the floor, embarrassed to look him in the eye. "How many were there?" When I told him the full story, including what Jeremy had done, he sat me down on the ottoman in front of his chair. "Steve, life sucks most of the time. Unless you're willing to fight for what you want, someone is always going to be there to try to take it from you. You're never going to be a fighter, you're too small, but that doesn't mean you have to give in to them. It only means you have to be smarter and willing to do whatever it takes to win. You understand?" I didn't, but I was soon to get an education on what an equalizer is. It was 8 inches long and had a leather strap I could slip my hand into. It was made from what used to be the handle of my old wooden baseball bat. Now it was my equalizer. Don't look for fights, however, if one comes up, don't run away. If they see they can't bully you anymore, they'll stop, and if they don't, make them pay until they do. My grandmother wasn't happy and told my dad the good book said to turn the other cheek. "Ma, the only thing that does is to give them another place to hit." The sooner he realizes that nothing in this world is free, much less easy, the better off he'll be. Dad showed me how to use it, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to walk to school. 3 days is all it took. Jeremy and I were walking home from school when the group that attacked us, plus one more, stopped us. "Your mom's a 304 and your dad's a chicken," the big kid in front said, with a stupid smirk on his face. I remembered what my dad said about trying to avoid a fight, so we tried to walk around them. "You hear what I said? Your dad is a chicken. So I guess that makes you one, too," he yelled. Laughing, he grabbed me from behind and pulled me to the ground. I was able to reach into my backpack, slipped my hand into the leather strap, and waited. I was just getting to my feet when he tried to kick me. With my equalizer in my right hand, I swung it hard and caught him on his lower left leg. His screams were music to my ears. I swung it again and caught him on his upper left arm. He was the one now on the ground bawling like a little baby. With newly found courage, I turned around and faced the stunned group. I saw fear in their eyes. I watched as they all took a step back. I turned and faced my attacker. "If I ever hear you say another word about my mother or father, or touch me again, I'll break one of your arms. Do you understand?" I whacked him on the arm again when he didn't respond. That got his attention. "Okay," was all he said, looking up at me. Jeremy and I walked right through the group. Even though I was still scared shitless, I felt good just the same. My heart was beating a mile a minute. I was covered in my own sweat. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a victim. When I told my grandma, she read me the riot act. Violence never solves anything. If you would have just walked away, they would have left you alone. I loved my grandmother to death, but she was from a time when people were nicer. That just wasn't the case anymore. All my dad did was smile when I told him. He cautioned me about getting too cocky, saying maybe now they would leave me alone. Even though the fight hadn't happened on school property, 2 days later my dad and I, plus all the other parents and kids, were called into the principal's office for a conference. My dad told me to say nothing as we listened to the parents of the kid I'd hit. They went on and on about how much pain Timmy was in and that I could have broken his arm and ruined his chances for a potential baseball scholarship. The other parents also said their children were greatly traumatized by the violence they witnessed. It was not looking good for me. When my dad stood up and started walking out, the principal asked where he was going. After listening to all this bullshit for the last 20 minutes, I think I need some fresh air. Mr. Moore, you don't seem to be taking this matter very seriously, the principal said, standing up to confront my dad. A bad move. But I am, or I never would have made that club for my son and shown him how to use it. Maybe the next time 4 bullies decide to pick on one smaller kid, they'll think twice about what can happen. My dad turned to confront the parents of the boy who had initially attacked me. But to tell you the truth, I wish to hell he had broken your son's arm. Then maybe he would understand what it feels like to get picked on day in and day out. And if you're interested, I also have a witness who will testify that the 4 of them started it. My son was only defending himself. It was now pretty quiet in that room. As I see it, we have 2 options here. 1, you can give each of these little creeps detention for being general pains in the butt, or I can contact the school board and inform them that the principal of our school is openly allowing the bullying of his students. My dad turned and faced the principal. The choice is yours. With the principal now stuttering, my dad grabbed me by the arm, and we started to walk out with our head held high. Just before we walked out the door, he turned to the father of the kid I'd hit. Oh, by the way, I knew your wife when she was in high school, and she was one of the biggest 304s around. I guess that makes you a chicken too. My dad smiled. He didn't wait for the reply he knew would ever come. Instead, we just walked out. I loved my dad. I'd like to say that growing up my dad was there for me all the time, but why lie? He gave me everything I physically needed, but didn't give me what the 2 women in my life had: love and warmth. To him, it was important to be strong and hard, and to never show your vulnerability because it was a sign of weakness. Real men aren't weak was what he instilled in me. It was my grandmother who became my surrogate mother and always went the extra mile for me. She made me feel loved, wanted, and did her best to instill in me how to treat others. And by others, I mean the members of the opposite sex. Though my dad dated on and off, he made it a point never to flaunt the women in front of me. He always made sure I was in bed if he did bring someone home with him. Every once in a while, I'd hear my dad and his date in his bedroom, but I never said a word about it. With him, there was to be no birds and bees discussion. He simply assumed I knew, or would pick it up on the street like he probably had. However, when I did get old enough to date, he told me if I even thought about doing it with a girl without protection, he and I would have a heart-to-heart, and I wouldn't like it very much. 3 days later, I found a box of condoms on my bed. Guess he was taking no chances. Your dad is so cool, my best friend Jeremy said. My dad would never have done that for me. I gave him half the box because at the time I wasn't even dating and he was. Jeremy and I were best friends ever since he had helped me ward off those bullies that one day after school. We were in the same grade, just not usually in the same class. We lived a couple of blocks from each other, and after school we congregated at either my house or his. My grandmother called him her adopted son, and his parents liked me enough that there was always an open dinner invitation. They knew about my mom and dad, but never once brought it up. When we hit high school, Jeremy played football while I ran cross-country and played soccer. We were still thick as thieves. Even when we started dating, it seemed we continued to put each other first. Well, Jeremy did until his senior year when he met Cindy. He fell so hard and fast, I told him he'd need a shovel to dig himself out. He was so deeply in love with her. She wasn't the most beautiful girl in class, but you'd never know it by the way he talked about her. I wished I had someone like that. I had my share of dates. I just never found that special one like he had. Most of the girls I dated were scatterbrains and thought they were God's gift to men, or boys in my case. When a couple of them played games with me, I called them out on it. If they didn't want to go out with me, all they had to do is say so instead of lying to me, because I always found out. Guys, unlike girls, weren't good at keeping dating secrets and were usually bragging about it the next day. I supposed I could have gone a little easier on them, but lying and trust were two huge issues with me. In college, I thought I was in love not once, but twice. Debbie was great. We gelled in many ways. Then I found out she wanted to travel the world. And kids? Well, she was going to be way too busy for that nonsense. Our relationship didn't last long. After 6 months of dating, I introduced Rosemary to my family. Everyone thought we were made for one another, even me, until I caught her in a lie, and not a small one at that. We'd had a bit of a rocky start. She was going out with a guy named Kenny. The relationship had run its course, and she was trying to break it off with him. We talked, went to a couple of movies, and I even sprung for dinner a few times trying to convince her to dump the jerk. Her words, not mine. Look, let me make myself perfectly clear. I told her at dinner one night, I really like you, but I'm a one-woman man. I don't share with anyone. If you want to go out with me, it'll have to be on an exclusive basis. I don't want to have to wonder what you're doing when we're not together. I thought I'd made it perfectly clear, but it seems I hadn't. How many times she lied to me, I'm still not sure. The issue is not the quantity, it's that she did it in the first place. That was the big issue with me. I don't even know if she slept with anyone else, and looking back now, she probably didn't, but once I had it in my mind that she lied to me, she was history. It was a Friday night. Rosemary said she was getting together with a few of her girlfriends to hang out. No problem. It would give me a chance to hang out with a few of my friends I'd neglected lately. On Friday nights, there were normally a ton of parties on and off campus. Even if you weren't of legal drinking age, there was alcohol to be had, and you didn't have to search too far, especially if you were a girl. Frat rats is what I called them. Guys in the fraternities whose main mission in life was to get girls drunk at their parties just to have sex with them. Everyone knew what happened at those parties, especially at two of the better-known frat houses that were always in trouble with the college and usually on probation. I never went to their parties, though a lot of my friends did. As I said previously, it was guy talk. Guys have no loyalties, especially if they have the chance to get a little stray sex. As it was told to me by one of my friends, Rosemary and 3 of her friends were at one of the frat parties Friday nights. He said he wasn't sure if she was drunk, but she was definitely making out with one of the guys while on the makeshift dance floor. Steve, I don't know how far she went with him, but they were going at it pretty hot and heavy for at least a half dozen songs. I didn't want to have to be the one to tell you, but I thought you should know. I was pissed. Even if she was drunk, she shouldn't have been making out with anyone but me. That weekend, I waited for her to call me. I wasn't about to call her. Finally, Sunday morning she called. Where have you been? You didn't call, and I cut her off. Rosemary, I'm working on a problem I can't seem to get my head around. Can I help? I know something I could get around your head. She laughed. I didn't. How was Friday night with your friends? What did you girls end up doing? I was fishing and wanted to see what I was going to catch. We just stayed in with a few bottles of wine and shot the shit all night. You know, girl talk. So you didn't even go out? I tried to give her one last shot at telling me the truth. She didn't take the bait. Nope. After a couple of hours, none of us were in any condition to walk, much less drive. I cut the conversation short, and when I hung up, I really think Rosemary thought she'd put one over on me. Over the next week, her calls, text messages, and emails all went unanswered. Where are you, and why aren't you taking my calls? She asked, a little frustrated, I imagine. It came to its inevitable head when she was waiting for me outside of my accounting classroom. Steve, what's going on with you lately? I can't seem to get hold of you. Why would you want to? Was my flip reply. Steve, why are you talking to me like that? If I didn't know better, I'd think that you were mad at me about something. Rosemary, I want you to think real hard and tell me again what you did last Friday night. She could see something was definitely wrong. You just hung out with a few girlfriends and a couple of bottles of wine, right? Yeah, just like I told you before. So you're saying Gary lied to me when he said he saw you and 3 of your friends at the Alpha fraternity house on Friday night. And there was no way you were dancing and making lips with some guy there. Is that what you're saying? She was fidgeting. The look in her eyes said I was right. Steve. She started to say before I stopped her. Because if he's right, we would be done, finished, because you know how I feel about lying. Thank God, you're not like that type of woman, and I can trust you implicitly no matter what. Tears were starting to well up in her eyes. She knew she'd been caught. I didn't say anything because I knew you'd be mad. They talked me into going. Did they tell you to stick your tongue down that guy's throat? How much further did you go that night? Did you give it up to him? Did you give him your panties as a souvenir of his conquest? Her tears were now falling fast. I was over it, and her, too. How come I kept meeting women like my mother? I've got to go. I've got a class. With that, I walked out of her life. I didn't answer any of her emails, especially the ones where she tried to explain it all to me. It was only one time, and she was sorry. So was I, but it didn't make any difference. We were history. Sorry, man, Jeremy said sympathetically as we tipped a few later that night. I thought you and Rosemary were a match made in heaven. So did I. I'm just glad I found out now instead of 10 years down the road like my dad did. Let me ask you a question. I looked him right in the eyes. Has Cindy ever lied to you? He looked at me strangely. You know, have you ever caught her in a lie? Nope, not that I can think of. And besides, if she did, it would have to be a pretty big one for me to dump her like you did Rosemary. Well, then, would you mind giving her to me? I can't seem to find a good one, and you did on your first try. With your record, you can always find another one. Even if I said yes, which I'm not going to, Cindy would never go for it. She thinks you're a hard-nosed and expect too much from people. Come again. I could not believe what I just heard. She just thinks you expect too much from people. Steve, everyone lies, even if it's just little white lies so as not to hurt someone's feeling. And don't give me any shit, because I've heard even you lie. Those aren't the lies I'm talking about. The ones I take to heart are the ones that affect relationships. If Rosemary was your girlfriend, what would you have done? She flat out lied to me. She was seriously making out with another guy. I even gave her a get-out-of-jail card not once but twice, and still she lied to my face. Steve, I think she was ashamed about what she had done and thought maybe if she could get out of it this time, she would never put herself in that position again. The problem with you, Steve, is you don't forgive and forget. With you, everything is black and white. I had two great role models. You can't blame your parents forever. People get divorced all the time. So your mom cheated on your dad. Not every woman cheats. I knew he was right. I just hadn't met the right girl. And since he wasn't giving up Cindy, I'd have to find my own good one. They say the first week after college graduation is one of the greatest weeks of your life. No more papers to turn in or tests to study for. You can kick back and enjoy your free time for a change, and that's just what I did. I had 2 job leads and an interview for another Thursday morning. My life was moving on, alone, but moving forward just the same. That's when it happened. Wednesday evening rush hour traffic was moving slower than normal, and I was kicking myself for venturing out into it for no particular reason. The a-hole in the car behind me was continuously trying to weave in and out of traffic, desperately trying to get an extra car length ahead. I looked in my rearview mirror at him, shook my head, and turned the radio volume up a little louder. As we inched forward, he must have seen an opening up ahead somewhere because he gunned his engine attempting to pull out while everyone was again stopping, everyone but him, that is. He smacked right into the left rear end of my car, pushing it into the one in front of me. What a dickhead, I thought, turning off my engine and getting out to assess the damage, knowing I was going nowhere now. He was ranting and raving about how he thought it wasn't his fault and what an idiot I was for stopping right in front of him. That's when I walked to the front of my car to see the damage my car had done to the car in front of me. She was good-looking, arrogant, and extremely loud. She got out of her car and started tearing into me using language worthy of a longshoreman. The driver of the car that hit me slithered back into his car before she could see him. There was Jesus Christ this, bullshit that, and a bunch of dumb shits thrown in, along with a couple dozen other foreign words spoken by what appeared to be a tall, hot-blooded Latina. Holy shit. I just make my last payment on my car and you hit the son of a witch. Do you even have a driver's license? And if you do, did you get it out of a box of Cracker Jacks? She screamed. When I didn't respond or say a word, she wanted to know what the hell I was going to do about her car. I wasn't quite sure how to answer her at first. I was just thankful she wasn't hurt. Look, I'm sorry I hit you, but the guy in the Mustang behind me hit me and pushed me into you. I'm just glad everyone is all right. Well, everybody isn't all right. Because he couldn't wait 10 damn seconds for the light to change, I'm going to be late picking up my little girl at daycare. She lit into us, standing there in a light blue sundress with her arms crossed in front of her. Her eyes were burning 1,000 holes into the other guy, while he sunk lower into the front seat trying to hide from her. Look, I said, even when the cops do come, which could be 20 minutes or an hour from now, all they're going to do is take a statement from everyone and make sure we all exchange insurance information. Why don't we exchange driver license numbers, phone numbers, insurance numbers, and we can all get out of here? She looked at her watch, burned a couple more holes into that guy's head, and said okay. I got out a pad of paper and started writing. Dickhead didn't have his insurance card with him, but we got the rest of his information. When he started talking to Regina, that was her name, telling her how sorry he was. He made the mistake of glancing down at her breasts, which weren't small, and they were all out there. Hey, a-hole. My eyes are up here, not down there, she spit out, getting in his face. I could tell Regina was getting ready to blow. Why don't we all relax and get this done so we can get out of here? I turned to look at her. And don't worry, he is 100% at fault. His insurance company will pay our insurance companies back. Who's going to pay my deductible to get my car fixed? I guess you're going to have to, but you should get it back from either his insurance company or mine. I gave her all my information, saying I hope her insurance company takes care of her. No, I was praying they'd take care of her. This was one lady I wouldn't want mad at me. Don't worry, because if they don't, the rest will come out of that guy's, but, she said, burning one more hole into the center of his forehead just for good measure. I pitied that poor son of a witch if his insurance company didn't come through. I wasn't sure mine would. The accident was not my fault. And I sure as hell didn't want to deal with that wild cat. Within 25 minutes of the accident, we each had everything we needed, much to the delight of all the cars that had been trying to get around us. In the meantime, the cops had finally arrived, giving us each an accident report to fill out. When they found out the guy in the Mustang didn't have his insurance information with him, they cited him, served him right. After what seemed like hours, but was really about 45 minutes, I was finally on my way. Over the next week, I went on 2 interviews and scheduled a third for the following Monday. The job I really wanted didn't pay as much as the other 2, but had the most chance for advancement. I would be a coordinator between engineering, purchasing, and manufacturing, responsible for making sure everything was scheduled and on time, and if engineering changes needed to be done, I would hand walk them through the process so there wouldn't be any delays. It can be a bit stressful at times. I can guarantee you that you won't be bored. The interviewer both informed and cautioned me. It sounded exactly like what I was looking for. A few weeks later, after a second and third interview, I accepted the position and was ready to start work. Life was pretty good about now. My insurance company informed me the reason that guy didn't have his insurance card with him was that he had no insurance. My car's damage would be repaired under my policy. I knew I wasn't going to get my deductible back from anyone. I called the a-hole. He said he'd been laid off weeks earlier and was broke, adding that as soon as he got another job, he'd make things right. Yeah, when pigs fly, I thought. I should have expected the call, but I didn't. However, when I answered the phone, I immediately knew who it was. That lowlife doesn't even have insurance, much less a job, were the first words out of her mouth. He said he's going to pay me back. Yeah, what bullshit. I'm not holding my breath. Guess that means I'm going to have to get it from your insurance company. Good evening, Regina, I said, trying to start our conversation over on a positive note. I have already submitted my accident report and everything else. If you'd like to call my agent, I'll be more than happy to give you his name and number. Give me the name and phone number just in case I hit a snag. I've got my car in the shop being worked on, so I need to put this to bed once and for all. I gave her everything she asked for. Hope everything turns out okay for you, I said on an upbeat note. Don't worry, it will. She hung up. I wonder if I'm going to have to find a new insurance agent after she calls him, I thought, pitying the next call my agent was going to receive. 2 weeks after Regina's phone called Jeremy, Cindy, and I went out to celebrate my new job. It was a big step for me. I was looking forward to getting my own place and finally getting out from under my father's wing. We had dinner at a nice Mexican restaurant. After our meal, we went to one of the newer dance clubs. Truth be known, I wasn't much of a dancer. I moved my feet, arms, and try not to look like a total doofus while out there on the floor. Personally, I like it when it's dark, crowded, and after about 3 beers. We had just finished our first round of drinks when we got lucky enough to grab a table from a group that was leaving. As crowded as it was in there, tables were worth their weight in gold. It was a nice club, the music was great, and I was really having a good time when out of the corner of my eye I caught someone walking towards our table. Shit, was all I got out before she was on me. Steve, your insurance company came through. Thank God, Regina said, without even a how are you doing or any other introduction. I'd still like to take a big hammer to that other guy in his damn car. Jeremy and Cindy sat there with their mouths open listening to Regina's rant. Regina, this is my best friend Jeremy and his girlfriend, Cindy. I tried to change the subject. Would you like to join us for a drink? She gave me a once-over, looked over her shoulder at the group she'd just left, and nodded. I guess one drink won't hurt. What can I get you? Surprise me, why don't you? She said, with a full mouth smile that went from ear to ear, which was easy for her because she didn't have a small mouth. I grabbed Jeremy and we headed towards the bar. "Is that the girl you hit?" was the first question out of his mouth. "She's kind of cute, but what a mouth." I thought Cindy was going to choke on her drink. We both laughed at that statement. Regina was not a tiny girl by any means. She could look me right in the eye, which had to put her at least at 5'8" in her stocking feet. She possessed a huge rack and had a booty that would rival any girl. She wasn't fat, but was far from being thin either. I guessed she had to weigh somewhere in the range of 150 to 165. She, my friend, was built for comfort, not speed. She's got a nice set on her, and how they're staying in that dress is an architectural marvel. Jeremy was just about drooling. We walked back to the table, drinks in hand, and I offered Jeremy a word of advice. "If you don't want to die a horrible death, do not stare at her boobs. I can tell you from experience she doesn't like it." We both looked at one another and laughed once more before arriving at our table. "Here you go, ladies." We gave out the drinks. Regina glanced down at hers and then at me. "What makes you think I drink red wine?" Now I was on the spot. "Well, you don't look like a white wine type of girl, though I think on occasion you like something a lot stronger. But for a casual night out and not wanting to get hammered, a smooth red wine is what you might like," I answered her, then took a sip of my Corona. Not bad at all." We touched glasses. "Where's your girl?" she said, looking around. "No girl, just the three of us celebrating my new job." "You gay?" "Your coming out of your nose burns like a son of a witch," and the choking that followed wasn't much fun either. "Gay? What the hell do you mean by that?" I was still recovering. "Well, you're a nice-looking guy, and if you don't have a girlfriend, I just assumed you must be gay. You know it's the new thing now, don't you?" "Well, I'm not gay if you're interested. I like women, it's just that I'm not going with anyone right now." "Got dumped, huh?" "No, I didn't get dumped. If you must know, I dumped her." Cindy was now doing her best not to laugh at our exchanges. "So, she wouldn't put out, or did you just get tired of her?" "Regina, why do you care?" "Just making conversation. Seems like I hit kind of a sore spot, huh?" "She lied to me. That's why we're no longer together." "Satisfied?" "I suppose, but it must have been something pretty big for you to almost take my head off, huh?" She just wasn't stopping. I looked over at Cindy and Jeremy for help. "Forget it. They were using us for their evening entertainment. Lying and cheating are two things I don't put up with from anybody," I said, maybe a little too loudly because more than a few people looked my way. I've been there also, and it's not fun. But the way I see it, most men can't be trusted. They lie to you to get into your pants, and after they get it, they're long gone. Bullshit. Women are just as bad as men. They lie hoping they won't get caught, and if they do, they blink their eyes, wiggle their hips, maybe shed a few tears, then say they are sorry, thinking that will make it all go away. Not in my book, it won't. We were now knee-deep in it. They do it because that's what has been done to them all their lives. There is a double standard out there, and you know it. A woman goes to bed with a couple of guys and she's labeled a 304, but when a guy gets more than a couple of girls into bed, he's a stud. Then when a guy decides to get married, he wants an untouched virgin, not some girl who has been around the block like him. It's a crock of shit. Like girls don't play games? If a guy's a hunk and has money, you girls fall all over yourselves just to go out with him. But if he's a normal guy with, say, a 10-year-old car, most women won't give him the time of day, much less go out with him. Girls like to date the bad boys and the ones that treat them like shit. But when it's time to settle down, they go back to the solid, stable ones they wouldn't have even given a second glance at before. The accountants, the computer geeks, the regular 9-to-5ers, and the like. All of a sudden, they're all lovey-dovey, telling them how much they would like to go out with them. Bullshit. All they're looking for now is that security blanket because their bad boys aren't the marrying kind and aren't going to give them what that poor naive son of a witch will. After they hook the trusting bastard and someone better comes along, they'll think nothing of cheating on their husband because they know he'll probably forgive them. I was hot. My heart was beating a mile a minute, and I was going off on a girl I barely knew. Now everyone really was looking at me. "Looks like someone had their ego bruised pretty good," Regina said, looking right back at me. "You may be right about some women, but not all. Like you, I've been screwed over a few times, so maybe I do keep my guard up. But unlike you, I give people a chance before jumping down their throat." Regina stood up. "Well, it's been enlightening. I've got to get back to my friends. Call me if you ever want to have this conversation again." With that said, she walked back to her group. Cindy and Jeremy were just staring at me, and after she was out of earshot, they broke out laughing. "What? Boy, does that girl have your number?" Cindy said. "Smart, good-looking, and comes with a ton of baggage. If I were you, I'd marry her and fast." Haha. Now I'm one big joke? Look, I didn't ask for any of this. People have walked over me and screwed me over my entire life outside of my grandmother and Jeremy. And, excuse me, if I have a few trust issues, you would have them too if you'd gone through what I've gone through. But, Steve, don't you see how it's holding you back from moving on and becoming the man I know you can be? Replied Cindy. Steve, I love you to death, but one of these days you're going to have to open up, lower your guard, and trust someone even if they end up hurting you. Life is too short for you to wonder, what if, every time you meet someone. Take a chance for once, and maybe one of these times you'll find what you're looking for. 2 more drinks, and we were ready to leave. Regina looked over at me, gave me a little wave goodbye, and we were on our way home. In the car, Cindy gave me another round of shit. Jeremy knew to keep his mouth shut. He was no dummy. Cindy gave me a hug goodbye, and I went into my house with way too much on my mind. I waited almost 2 weeks before I called her. I still had her phone number from the accident and thought, what the hell? What did I have to lose? It was Tuesday. I figured early enough to ask her out to dinner on Saturday. She had plans. The next week it was the same story. The 3rd week I called on Monday. Guess what she said? I didn't call the following week, but lo and behold, who did I see Saturday at the same club I had a month earlier? When she came over about an hour after I'd gotten there, I was ready for what was going to come next. Evening, Steve, is how she opened her conversation, but that's all she got out of her mouth. What? Are you slumming or looking for a free drink? I replied before she could say another word. Because if you are, please find yourself another Patsy. Damn, the words came rolling out of her mouth in both English and Spanish. She called me everything but a tall white boy. I don't think she even took in a full breath while she exploded with her second round of what I think were insults. What really pissed her off was when I turned my back on her after telling her that I had better things to do than to argue with a stuck-up woman. Now there were only a few English words being spoken as I watched her eyes get red, her cheeks get flushed, and her voice move up 2 octaves. I was getting tired of her never-ending tirades. We were starting to draw a crowd. I needed to end it. Regina, if you didn't want to go out with me, all you had to say was that you don't date skinny white boys instead of giving me a line of shit. I would have understood. Lying just supports my theory that the only thing hot women care about are themselves. I was done arguing. She stormed off, and the crowd that had gathered around us soon dissipated. My friends Gary and Rick just stood there looking at me. That was so incredibly cool, Gary said, giving me a high five. I never would have had the balls to say that to some chick. I'm still in shock she didn't slap your face or kick you in the balls or something. My ex-girlfriend would have probably hit me with a damn chair. Don't look now, but one hot Latin woman approaching at 10 o'clock, Rick said, giving me a heads up. When she reached to me, she made sure we were face to face before she started in. For your information, I actually was busy those days, and if you would have called me this week, you would have found that I would have gone out with you. But now that's never going to happen. She made sure she said this with her eyes glued to mine, so I couldn't turn away from her this time. Furthermore, you're never going to get your hands on this hot body, and that will be your loss. There was no way I was going to let that slide. I retaliated back. So tell me, what are you going to do when all your homies are done with you and have slobbered all over your hot body and left you alone in bed? Are you going to wonder what it would have been like to go out with someone who wanted to be with you for who you are, instead of what you could do for them? Her wide-eyed look said it all. I left that night feeling pretty good about myself, knowing it wasn't my fault this time. Tuesday night, I was eating dinner with my dad when my cell phone rang. I looked at the number and debated whether to answer it. Dad, I need to take this, I told him, walking out the patio door onto the deck. What do you want, Regina? A truce to start. Okay, I'm listening. Look, you don't know shit about me. If I said I was busy, I was busy. I don't lie. And another thing, I don't allow anyone to talk to me like you did. Understand? I think we got off on the wrong foot right out of the blocks. If you want to try again, I'm game. If not, like I said, your loss. You keep saying that. Well, you keep saying I look hot. We both chuckled at that statement. Okay, how about dinner Saturday night? Can't. I'm busy. But you just said. I said I'm busy Saturday with a church bazaar, but not Friday. Okay, how about us getting together Friday evening? I'd love to go out with you Friday night. See, that wasn't so hard now, was it? We talked for the next half hour about mostly crap or fluff, as I like to call it. She gave me her address and told me to pick her up at about 7 o'clock. Be warned, I still live at home with my parents, and you're going to get more than the once over. I think I can handle myself. Steve, you don't know my family. She was right. Why couldn't she have been ready and waiting for me so we could have rushed out the door? Her dad greeted me at the door with a firm handshake. Peering in, I could see two other large men leaning up against the fireplace mantel in the living room. They were partially hidden by what must have been 8 women, all looking and watching me when I walked into the house. What did I do for a living? Was I Catholic? Where did I live? And since I lived with my dad, was I looking at getting my own place? And finally, what did I think about kids? I'm just glad they didn't ask if I had my own teeth and proceed to check them out, because at that point I would have screamed. "I warned you," Regina said when we walked out to my car. "I didn't think there were going to be so many people. My parents, my older brothers, my grandmother, and my aunts all had questions when I told them who I was going out with. My family is very protective. But did your dad have to take my fingerprints?" We both laughed at that one. We had a nice time. It was a little tense at times given our brief fiery history, including more than a little baggage we both were carrying around. Her ex-boyfriend had gotten her pregnant and booked when he found out. As far as she knew, he'd gone back to Puerto Rico where they both came from. Regina told me up front her 3-year-old daughter, Angela, came first. "Steve, what are your thoughts about dating a woman with a 3-year-old child? You have to understand that sleepovers would be out of the question, and it would never be just the two of us. I always have to consider Angela when we make plans. It could be complicated, and if you don't want to go any further, I'd understand. Why don't we take it a day at a time and see how it goes? I haven't been around that many kids, so it's going to be a new experience for me, but I don't scare that easily." They kicked us out of the restaurant at 11. I was driving her home when she asked me to pull over into a parking lot about a half-mile from her house. She unbuckled her seatbelt, moved over to me, and gave me a kiss that melted the soles of my shoes, not to mention giving me a huge hard-on. After 3 more kisses, she moved back over to her side of the car, fastened her seatbelt, and straightened her hair. I had a very surprised but pleased look on my face. "Did you really think I was going to let you kiss me parked in front of my house or on my parents' doorstep with everyone staring at us? Besides, I wanted to see if you had any potential without being under pressure. Now drive. I need to get home before they send out a search party." When we got to her house, I opened her car door, walked her up to her front door, and got a peck on the lips for my trouble. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw shadows moving from window to window inside the house. They can't be this protective, I thought to myself, walking back to my car. She's not a kid by any means. She has a daughter, for Christ's sakes. I gave her one final wave before getting into my car and driving off. All right, I knew it was a stupid thing to do, and I probably would have gotten away with it if it hadn't been for someone in her family seeing me drive by the church Saturday night. They waved at me, I waved back, then felt my stomach clench up. "Shit," I said under my breath. "You were checking up on me?" Regina shouted into the phone. Her loud, harsh words resonated in my head. "It's not what you think. I just wanted to see what you were doing." That sounded about as stupid as her saying I did a drive-by. "Then why didn't you stop in? Would you believe I feel a little intimidated by your family?" That was no lie. "Steve, I come from a large, close, Catholic family, and we all look out for and help one another. It's probably no different than yours." She had no idea what she was saying. "Regina, let's just say my upbringing was a little different from yours, and let it go at that. Look, if I embarrassed you in any way, I'm truly sorry. You didn't embarrass me. It's just that I think you have some major trust issues we're going to have to deal with if I decide to go out with you again. I'm not going to lie to you, and the sooner you get that through your thick skull, the better. However, I will not put up with you spying or stalking me. Can you understand that? So, if you want to act like a normal person, then we can go out again. If not, do not call me anymore." No question, her cards were on the table. "I'm sorry, it won't happen again. How about if I make it up to you this Saturday? You are free, aren't you? You're in luck. There is nothing on my calendar, not yet anyway. Good. Pencil me in. I'm going to let you pick the restaurant this time. I'm not a racist, I'm really not, but I felt more than a little uncomfortable with the restaurant Regina picked. It was nice, the food was fantastic, but from the moment we walked through the front door, all eyes were on me as if I'd come from another planet. It felt like I was on display. This is my most favorite restaurant in the whole world. They make everything from scratch and the portions are to die for." She was right about that because I couldn't even finish my meal. If I close my eyes and take a deep breath, I can make believe I'm back home in my grandma's kitchen in Puerto Rico, eating at her big wooden kitchen table. Regina was all smiles, but looking over at a few other tables, the guys there weren't. "Can you say moving in on one of their women?" Then it started. It began with just an innocent question. Sadly, my answer opened up a chapter of my life I had tried hard to keep closed. Steve, when you think back, what is your most vivid memory of your childhood? Like I said, it was an innocent question, and I think she expected some cute story of my mom baking cookies for me, something sweet and innocent, but that's not what came out of my mouth. My mom slapping my face when I tried to stop her from walking out on my dad and me. I said it in a soft monotone voice with an expressionless face. Well, that sure as hell wiped the smile off her face. What followed was a discussion that I only ever had with Jeremy and my grandmother. I tried not to let my anger get the better of me, but my quivering voice got louder and louder. Regina finally thought it might be better if we carried on with this conversation somewhere else. I paid the check, and for the next 2 hours we continued the conversation in the front seat of my car. It brought me back to my own personal hell. I didn't tell her everything. I gave her just enough of the highlights so she'd understand why I was the way I was, including my closeness to Jeremy. Steve, not every woman is like your mother. Some are, but most aren't. And not every woman out there is on a mission to screw you over. Believe me. I wanted to believe her, but damn, it was hard. We dated and saw each other at least one night a week over the next 3.5 months. Our families were total opposites, and although I resented some of their glares and what I thought were way too personal questions, they finally decided I was probably harmless and eased up on me. Not entirely, but a little. I was happy. Regina was happy. Even Angela seemed happy to go with the flow, though still a little reserved around me. When I went to Regina's Sunday family dinners, it was fun, enlightening, and a little stressful all at the same time, only because I was sure everyone's eyes were constantly on me. Relax, you're the new flavor of the month. When my cousin Carla brought a guy with her out of the blue to church, no less, no one would leave the two of them alone until they had all the dirt. Steve, women are naturally curious, unlike men, and they want to know all the juicy details. I felt better, just barely. My family never went to church, but I was expected to accompany her every Sunday. Her family still wasn't completely sure about me, and I them. This whole family thing was all new and foreign to me. When I said Regina was hot, I wasn't lying. I liked the fact that I could look her right in the eye when I kissed her, and I could give her a good squeeze without worrying about her breaking. She was a fantastic kisser, with a body I wanted to explore, but she wasn't about to share, at least not yet. After getting my hand slapped away more than a few times, we had a come-to-Jesus conversation. Steve, I really like you. You know my past, so I hope you can understand why I'm not ready for that next step yet. I know you're getting a little frustrated, she said, sporting a wicked smile, but think how great it'll be when we actually do it. Can you say blue balls? I told her I understood and would wait until she was ready, but not happily. What choice did I have? I'm just glad I hadn't divorced my right hand yet. Then came the day one of my hidden flaws showed its ugly head. Be it a bad case of insecurity, jealousy, or just not wanting anyone touching my girlfriend, our next round of discussions cut deep into our happy relationship. You see, Regina loved to dance, not like to dance, loved to dance. As I mentioned, I was no Fred Astaire, and although I liked to dance, I preferred slow dances with her in my arms. Because I kept turning her down when we were at this one club, I stupidly told her, "Go knock yourself out," when she asked me if I minded if she danced with a few other guys. Huge mistake. Now, week after week, I was forced to watch from the sidelines as she did every dance imaginable with any Tom, Dick, or Harry who asked her. Let me rephrase that last statement. With every Emilio, Marcos, or Roberto. Some were past friends, others new friends, and the rest, well, who knows. I just think they just wanted a piece of her action. It was waning on me. We had a bit of an argument, especially after I told her I didn't like her dancing with every guy who asked her. I tried to explain I wasn't too happy with what she was doing. I wanted her to sit with me and listen to the music. She laughed and said that this was called a dance club for a reason and not to worry, she would dance every old person's song with me. I let her know her condescending attitude didn't amuse me. Or should I say we, let it slide that night, but I knew it wasn't over. We were on a double date with Jeremy and Cindy at one of our favorite clubs. Jeremy, like me, lasted only a couple of songs, and then the girls went off to amuse themselves. Cindy came back after about a half-dozen dances, but Regina was nowhere to be found. After another half hour went by with no Regina, I went looking for her. She was dancing, if you could call it that, to a salsa number. She looked hot, but that guy had his hands in places it took me over 3 months to put mine without getting slapped. By the time that song ended, the next one had started, so I never had a chance to cut in. I waited for that song to end and made my move. I cut in, and by the time the song had ended, I was the most embarrassed guy on the floor. All right, I'm a shitty dancer, but Regina danced around me, highlighting what I already knew, and now everyone else did, too. Then she did the inexcusable. She laughed at me. Whether it was because of the way I moved on the floor or I just looked comical, it made no difference. The final insult came when another one of her friends whisked her away when the music started again, leaving me on the dance floor, alone, while everyone danced around me. The only word I can use to describe how I felt was humiliated. I watched her float around the floor with her new partner, dirty dancing with him. Making my way back to our table, I was livid. I had reached the limit of my patience. I slammed down 2 more beers watching Regina go from guy to guy. However, one guy in particular was monopolizing her time on the floor. My anger grew, and the beers I was throwing down weren't doing me any good trying to control it. "Steve, relax. They're just dancing," Cindy said, watching the top of my head blow off seeing this guy gave Regina a kiss on the lips when the music stopped. I almost made it to the dance floor before the music started again, but that didn't happen. She and her new dance partner disappeared somewhere on the crowded dance floor. "I don't need this shit," I mumbled, walking back to the table. I slammed my beer down, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the door. "Steve," Cindy called out to me, but I never turned around. Jeremy followed me out the door. "You know this is going to piss her off, don't you?" he said outside the club. "I see your point, and she probably did go overboard tonight, but you getting pissed and leaving her here isn't going to solve anything. Besides, you are already half in the bag and shouldn't be driving. Come back in and cool off. At least take a cab home. If I stay here any longer, she's not going to like what I have to say when she finally does decide to honor me with her presence. You can drive her home unless she decides to go home with one of her many dance partners." I don't think either he or anyone else could have convinced me to stay. I felt like everyone in there was laughing at me for the way Regina was acting and treating me. She had come with me, hadn't she? Driving home drunk was a totally stupid thing to do. When I staggered in through the front door, my dad took one look at me and let me have it with both barrels. "If I ever even think you've been driving drunk again, I'll call the cops on your tail myself. I don't care if you kill yourself. It's the poor son of a witch you take with you I'm concerned about." I tried to explain why I'd done it, but he said it made no difference to him. "If you can't hold on to your girl, that's your own damn fault." That's when the 5 beers I drank that night got me into a whole lot more trouble. "Is that what happened to you and Mom? She went looking for someone better." I knew as soon as I said it I crossed the line. I may have thought it over the years, it's just that I never before had been stupid enough to say it. I didn't see the punch, but I sure as hell felt it. I went down like a ton of bricks. "You don't know shit. You hear me?" he screamed at me. "Your mother was a 304 and still is. I treated that woman like a queen, and she stabbed me in the back time and time again. You're just as ungrateful as she was, and I want your butt out of my house by next week. Do you hear me?" I did, but it wasn't completely registering since I was 3 sheets to the wind and unsuccessfully trying to clear my head. My dad went off in a huff, leaving me lying on the kitchen floor. Life wasn't looking so good right now. When you get your back up, it's hard to listen to reason, even if you know it's the right advice. I found a small apartment close to work and took off Wednesday to move. My dad wouldn't talk to me, and Regina? Well, she didn't call either. I guess she was as angry at me as I was at her about Saturday night. Jeremy helped me get my remaining items out of my dad's place Wednesday night. Just before walking out, I took the house and garage key off of my key ring and left them both on the kitchen counter. Now I truly had no family. "Give him a couple of days, he'll come around," Jeremy said. I knew, though, this was something that could be a real deal breaker. When, after 3 weeks, he hadn't returned any of my messages, I pretty much gave up. After that, Regina and I had a huge blow-up about her attitude and what I saw as her disrespecting me that Saturday night. She ended up telling me to go screw myself. Life really was not looking good right now, and it was about to get worse. I was alone, and for the first time, I didn't have to answer to anyone but myself and maybe my new boss. Cindy thought I was being a total jerk to pretty much everyone. When I told her to get the hell off my back, Jeremy and I had our first real argument in 20 years. He was upset that I had put him in the middle, and although he understood how I felt, he was in love with Cindy. I made it easy for him. He didn't have to choose sides. I stopped calling him to. I started hanging out with a new group from work. It was a mix of both women and men who loved to party, especially on the weekends. I started forcing myself out on the dance floor, and in doing so I think my skin got an inch thicker. I no longer cared what people thought about me on and off the dance floor, and maybe for once I got a little bit more of a backbone. I saw her dancing up a storm with more than a couple of guys. She knew I was there because on several occasions I caught her looking my way. I danced more than I normally would have, especially when they played a slow song. We were playing a stupid game, and we both knew it. I just didn't know which one of us would take it to the next level. I didn't see her walk up because I had my back to the dance floor, but everyone else at our table did. "Steve, do you want to dance?" she said, with not even a hint of a smile or any warmth. "Regina, didn't you humiliate me enough the last time around? Or do you just want to show everyone here how much better a dancer you are than me? I'm sure you can find a lot better partners. You never seemed to have a problem before. You're really a pain in the who-know-where, you know that?" And for your information, it wasn't anything like what you just said. I could see her group of friends watching us, one guy in particular. "Thanks for asking, but no thanks. I wouldn't want your new guy to get the idea I was moving in on his territory." I'm not sure what I saw in her eyes, but what was on her face was pure anger as she turned around and stomped back to where her friends were sitting. I was getting bored with the whole club scene. I liked listening to the music. It was just that the crowds, the smoke, and the pressure I was putting on myself to be someone I wasn't made it much less fun each time I went. I watched him walk towards our table, but that wasn't anything out of the ordinary. It was the guy at Regina's table who had been giving me the evil eye, but with the bar right behind me, I figured he was headed for it. He didn't look angry, he wasn't a bruiser, he wasn't even making eye contact. Looking back, I should have been on my guard, but hell, this is a dance club, for Christ's sakes. One of the last things I remember was seeing him pull something shiny out of his jacket pocket with his right hand. He never said a word when he walked up to me, he didn't plan to. The pain in my stomach was sharp and intense. Operating on instinct, I pushed him away and saw the knife in his hand was covered with blood. My blood. I think at that moment I was in shock.